Today, we're going to continue on with our study of the book of Deuteronomy or Deuteronomy. If you have your Bibles, if you will turn them to Deuteronomy or Deuteronomy chapter 20, that is where we will begin our discussion this morning. When Israel went to war and they saw that the enemy had superior numbers and better equipment, they were not to fear, for the presence of God was with them. He would deliver them just as he had saved his people from Pharaoh and his armies at the sea. So as we begin to look at Deuteronomy chapter 20, we see that the people of Israel are told that when you go out to battle your enemies and you see that they have superior numbers, there's more men in their ranks than yours, when you see that they have superior equipment, when you see that they have horses and chariots, do not fear them, because of the fact that the Lord your God is with you, and he will go before you. He will save and deliver you just as he saved and delivered you from Pharaoh and his forces at the Red Sea. If you remember, they had their backs up against the sea, and that God came to their rescue, and he allowed them to go through to safety while defeating Pharaoh and causing his chariots and his horsemen to be submerged in the sea. They were drowned in the waters of the Red Sea. To underscore that the battle belongs to the Lord, the furments from battle were given to those who had completed a house but had not yet started to live in it, had planted and tended a vineyard but had not eaten and enjoyed its fruit, and one who had become betrothed to a woman but had not yet completed the ceremony and taken her for wife. The deprivation of enjoying the results of one's labors and experiencing death before consummating a marriage was seen as a great tragedy. So what we have is that Israel's men are gathered for battle. But to show them that the battle belongs to the Lord, that it's not who has the largest number of men or who has the most and the best equipment, whether one has horses and chariots or not, and to show them that the battle belongs to the Lord, again, that before the battle begins, there are going to be these deferments that are given to many within their ranks for various reasons. And we're going to talk about that here for a few minutes. A person who had built a house and completed it, but had not yet had the opportunity to live in it and enjoy it, they were given a deferment. One who had planted and tended a vineyard, but had not yet had the opportunity to eat of its fruits, that he was given a deferment from the battle. Also, we are told that one who was betrothed to a woman, but had not yet had the opportunity to complete the marriage and consummate the marriage, that he too was given a deferment. So, what are we talking about here? In ancient Israel, a man would go to a woman and propose marriage to her, and then he would go and prepare a place for her, and then when everything was ready, he would go and they would complete the ceremony and consummate the marriage. So, we see here the reasons for these deferments. In Israel, the person was to enjoy the fruit of their labor. So a man has taken time to build a house, and that he should have the opportunity to live in it and enjoy it. Another thing is that if he has planted and tended a vineyard, he should have the opportunity to enjoy the fruits of his labor and eat of that harvest. Another thing is that in Israel, it was a great tragedy if a person had a betrothal where two were joined together, and then before they were able to complete the ceremony and consummate the marriage, that this individual would be killed in battle. It was seen in Israel as a great tragedy. So for these reasons, they were given these deferments. There's also a couple of more here that we need to talk about. Those who were fearful or unable to kill another were dismissed for the purposes of potentially causing panic or negatively affecting the army. So again, I should have said that we were reading verses 5 through 8. So you can see it there that it goes further in these verses. And that it talks about if one is fearful. So if there is an individual who is fearful of the battle, afraid of being killed in the fight, they were given a deferment because they might cause panic. Once the fighting begins and they see the other army racing towards them, they'll begin to run, and that causes fear within the ranks. Also, those who were a conscientious objector, those who said, I cannot shed human blood, they too were given a deferment lest they cause negative feelings within the army. Now, again, all of these things were to show that the battle belongs to the Lord. Further, even in the days when Israel was fighting for existence against the Seleucid Empire, Judah exempted all from battle, all who had just built a house, planted a vineyard, was about to be married, or an individual who was fearful. So those of you who have been with us at Hanukkah, when we talked about the war between the Seleucid Empire and the people of Israel, we know that the Seleucid Empire had said, enough. You are going to give up your customs, your God, and live according to the Greek customs and worship the Greek gods. But we know many in Israel resisted. This revolt was led by the house of Hashmon. The army was led by a man whose name was Judah. And that, again, Judah followed what was said here in Devarim of Deuteronomy chapter 20. Now, again, they had the small army against the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire was the United States of its day. It had a large army. And so Israel needed every single man that they could use. But again, Judah is following the word of the Lord. And so he says, any of you who have built a house and not had a chance to live in it and enjoy it, go home. Those of you who have planted a vineyard and tended it, but have not yet eaten of its fruit, go home. Those of you who have become betrothed to a woman, but have not had the ceremony and consummated the marriage, go home. If you're fearful of the fight, go home. And so, therefore, we see that, again, they are trusting that God is going to go before them. Though they are a small force, He will go before them and give them the victory. Now, once the deferments were made, and before the army went forth to battle, the priest with the troops was to step forward and address the men with words of encouragement, reminding them that it's not the numbers of the army or superiority of the weaponry that ensures victory, but the presence and power of the Lord. So we have the gathering of the men, and then they have all these possible deferments. Once the men have received their deferments, what is left, the remaining men that will make up the army, they are there, and they had a priest that traveled with them, and that the priest would step up and he would give them words of encouragement. And again, he would remind them, it's not the numbers in your ranks that will guarantee the victory. It's not the superiority of your weaponry, but it is the fact that God is going before you. He is going before you and with you. He will lead you into the fight, and you will have the victory. Now, when Israel was involved in warfare with those who dwelt outside the borders of the Promised Land, the Israelite army was to offer terms of peace, including tribute and involuntary servitude. But if they resist, the male population was to be put to the sword, while the women, girls, livestock, and everything in the town could be taken as plunder. So, there's going to be two ways that the Israelites are going to engage the enemy. First of all, if the ones that they are fighting dwell outside of the borders of Canaan, outside the borders of what will be the promised land, that God says the first thing you are to do is offer them terms of peace. That if they decide that they don't want warfare, then what will happen is, if they don't want warfare, then they will agree to the peace. And then what will happen is you will reduce them to tribute, a tax that they will give every year, and that they will be reduced to involuntary servitude. But if they say, no, we will not surrender, we will fight, then when God gives you the victory and you take this place, you are to see to it all the males are put to the sword, all the men and all the boys. Why the boys? Because boys will become men and a threat to Israel. So all the men and the boys are put to the sword. And then the women, the girls, the livestock, and all of the goods of that place will be plunder for the Israelite people. Now, an example of this can be found from the days of King David. When the armies captured Rabbah, David took the king's crown. It was made of a talent of gold and adorned with precious stones. He plundered the city and reduced its inhabitants and all the other Ammonite towns to involuntary servitude. So, again, we see in the days of David that David led his men against Rabbah, and that we know that they were victorious. And they took Rabbah, and if you don't know where Rabbah is, think of Amman, Jordan. So Rabbah was what is today Amman, Jordan. So they are there, and they're fighting against this place, and they are victorious. God gives them the victory. And what happens is that the first thing David does is take the king's crown because it is very valuable, a talent of gold. And some people differentiate as to how much gold that was, but it was a whole lot of gold. And that it had precious stones in it, and so it was very valuable. David took it for himself. And then what they did was they plundered the city, and then they reduced the people of this town, in fact, all the Ammonite towns that surrendered to him. They plundered, they took all the livestock and everything that they had, and then they reduced them to involuntary servitude. The men would have been those who worked with axes and doing different physical labor, while the women and the girls would have been house servants and the like. But they were reduced to involuntary servitude. The Israelites were prohibited from destroying fruit trees and devastating the lands they were to conquer like other nations had done. In fact, Rome, in their attempt to terrify the population through crucifixion and to besiege cities, they deforested much of Judea. So we see here in this 20th chapter, verses 19 and 20, that God says that when you fight against a place, you are not to destroy their trees, and you are not to devastate the land. Now, this was the way armies did back then. They would go in, and not only would they defeat the people, but they would devastate the land. They would cut down the trees. They would ruin the land. But again, God says you will not do that. If you want to know of an example of an army that basically did that, it is when the Romans came and took what was Israel, or at that time Judea. They came and they wanted to terrify the population. So they had plenty of crucifixions. So how did they get all the wood for these execution stakes or crosses? But to cut down trees and form them into crosses. And then we know that they cut down trees to make siege towers to fight against the cities. So to terrify the population through crucifixion and to besiege the city, they devastated the land. It is hard to think about how beautiful the land Israel was in the ancient world. They said the land flowed with milk and honey, plenty of trees and foliage and, this and that. But because of what happened, the land was devastated. They had soil erosion and the like. And the people, for the last 77 years, have been trying to restore the land from what they had found it in, the condition that it was when they took it. Now, Um, in, or the offer of peace to the inhabitants of the pagan cities and the prohibition of destroying fruit trees and foodstuffs was to limit the loss of life and the wanton destruction of that which is useful to man. So we know that God does not delight in the shedding of blood, even if they are a sinful people. And so, in other words, he says it's not necessary to be going out and being a butcher against all these people. If they will surrender, if they will serve you, that is great. And when you go up against them, you are not to devastate their land. He says the trees are not your enemies. And so, therefore, do not destroy the fruit trees. They're good for food. You can eat of its fruit. Another thing is that you are not to destroy all the foodstuffs, but that this food can be used for your benefit. Okay? So again, it's not about destruction, but it is about reducing these people so that you can serve over them. And if they agree to surrender, you can use these things for your benefit. However, those who dwelt in Canaan were to be destroyed, since they would be a source of temptation to the Israelites, to encourage them to engage in the worship of false gods and to walk in ways that are abominable in the sight of God. Since their cup of iniquity was full, God used the Israelites as his rod of justice to destroy them from the Holy Land. I said there were two types of warfare. If their enemies were outside the land, they were to be given an opportunity to surrender and agree to pay tribute and, be involved in involuntary servitude. Now, if they were in the land, they didn't get this opportunity. God said, when you go into the land, the inhabitants of Canaan are to be utterly and completely destroyed, because of the fact that if they allowed these people to live among them, that they would lead them astray. We know that what was said of these people was that their cup of iniquity was full. Here was a people that engaged in all kinds of evil, idolatry, sorcery, divination, all kinds of wickedness. They burned their children in the fire to their gods. They were engaged in sexual promiscuity and every manner of evil. And so again, their cup of iniquity was full, and God says of Israel, they will be my warriors, that they will be my rod of justice, and that they are to go in and wipe out these people utterly, obliterate everything. Kill the people and destroy their livestock. Everything that has breath is to be utterly destroyed. Now, I just want to make a couple more points, and then I'm going to close. Israel will one day learn that her soldiers and weapons and defense pacts with nations will not save her. Only God can defend and deliver. So we have seen from the days that they were about to enter the land that they were thinking of all manner of ways. They thought that they could only win if they had superior numbers. They only thought they could win if they had advanced technology and weaponry. They thought that they could win only if they had pacts of defense with other peoples, as we saw right before they went to Babylon, that they were looking for allies, and that they would go to Assyria, and they would go to Egypt, and they would go to these places seeking to enter into defense pacts to fight their enemies. But again, that will not work, and we see this today. You don't hear the people of Israel basically say, we're going to look to God. When you hear them, we're going to call up reserves, we're going to trust in the number of men and women who are in our ranks. That's how we're going to win. Then they will tell you, well, it will be by advanced technology. It will be by David's sling. It will be by these missiles that will shoot these rockets down. It will be the latest in the Merkava tanks. It will be in all of this advanced weaponry. Then they'll say it's in our defense pacts. We will trust in the United States to save us from our enemies. We will trust in NATO to save us, or the United Nations, or whomever. But what it will be is that they will be led to a place where they have to trust in the Lord. Everybody will turn on them. And then what will happen is that Yeshua will return with a shout of one of the ruling angels and a blast of the shofar, and he will come with the hosts of heaven, and that he will come and he will defeat the adversary who is Satan, the anti-Messiah who is the Antichrist, and all those who have risen up to oppose God and seek the destruction of his people. Yeshua will win the victory, and he will reign from David's throne over Israel and all the nations of the world. Now, we know that there is where God will defend his people in the physical, but also in the spiritual realm. Those who are united with God through the finished work of Messiah can expect to experience the assault of the adversary. Shaul or Paul warns his readers that they wrestle not against flesh and blood, but the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realm. Therefore, they are to take up the whole armor of God, so that their heart and mind may be defended from doubt and deception that lead to destruction, and engage the enemy in his strength, that they may have the victory, receive the crown of life, and have an inheritance in the kingdom. So we talked about where God saves in the physical, but also in the spiritual. And we know that if you are united with God through trusting in the finished work of Yeshua, we know for a fact that you are going to experience an attack from the adversary. It is fact that the adversary will come against you. And so therefore, as Shaul or Paul writes to the Ephesians, that they were to take up the whole armor of God, because they are not fighting flesh and blood, but they are fighting spiritual forces in the heavenly realm. And that therefore they are to take up the whole armor of God. Now I'm not going to name every one of them, but I'm just going to give you a few of them. The breastplate of righteousness, the shield of trust, the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit. Now all of these things are necessary because of the fact that they will protect the chest. You know, if we're in ordinary warfare, they will protect the chest and the head. Now, think of the fact that the adversary is going to come against you, and he always works against your mind and against your heart. So that when he sends forth slings and arrows, that you can have the breastplate of righteousness and the shield of trust to protect you from those fiery darts and arrows. Also, the helmet of salvation to protect your mind from the thoughts and that which the adversary will bring against you. So again, some of the things that we know that he does is that he will bring doubt into the mind of the individual. We have heard people say, is it really true that all we need to do is trust in Yeshua? Do we need anything other than the finished work of Yeshua to be delivered? Also, he will work in the area of deception, and he has, because there are people that say, I don't really need the finished work of Yeshua because I am a good person. I love my spouse. I love my children. I pay my taxes. I live as a good person. I love my neighbor. I haven't done anything to end up in jail or in prison. So I'm a pretty good person. I don't think I need the finished work of Yeshua. So again, he's working against our minds and against our hearts, and therefore we must take up these things so that we can defeat the adversary. So now again, we know that if we are united with God through trusting in the finished work of Yeshua, that we are forgiven. Our sins are covered and carried away. Then the Spirit of the living God will come to dwell within us. And that what will happen is that the Spirit will begin the work of transformation from the old sinful man, the old sinful woman, to the new man, the new woman, with a new heart and a desire to love the Lord and walk in accordance with His will, and to empower us to run the race to completion. Now, what is it that happens when you run the race to completion, but that you receive the crown of life, the crown of victory, and that you will have an inheritance in the new Jerusalem. And in this place, you will live in the presence of your God. You will have life, joy, and peace for all eternity. And that is something to remember, because of the fact, no matter what anybody says, if you are alive when the anti-Messiah appears, you are going to go through the tribulation. And we are already beginning to see troubles show up on the earth. And so therefore, you are to take heart, and you are to stand firm, and then we are to encourage one another to stand strong and walk uprightly before God. And that again, if we will trust in the finished work of Yeshua, and that we will allow the Spirit to empower us to walk to victory, what is it but that we will have a place in the New Jerusalem, and there we will live in the presence of our God, walking by the light of the risen Lamb, and we will have life, joy, and peace for all eternity. And that's the message.